Energy concerns is something every South African has. Now, will Eskom be able to give us sustained energy in the years to come? I suppose that's the question that many of us ask. And as the South African government looks into nuclear deals with Russia, we're joined on the line by Paul McNally from the WITS Radio Academy, who looked into this issue on this week's episode of The Science Inside. Paul, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
Now, it's a very, very newsworthy and very interesting topic that you delved into this week. And what I really noticed from listening to the episode is no two experts really agree.
Yeah, that was the great part. Like, everyone had a conflicting opinion. We had someone from Earthlife Africa, Tristan Taylor, and he was very against the idea of nuclear power for all sorts of reasons, from the fact that we don't have any way to deal with the waste, the fact that it's prohibitively expensive, and also that it means building these huge buildings that are a huge amount of concrete. Other experts we had, like nuclear physicists that we had on, were okay with it. They were kind of like, well, it's a means to an end. You need a balance of different types of power, but maybe it's not so bad. So that was really, really interesting to know that there isn't just one opinion. It's sort of unanimous.
Now, the truth of the matter is that we do live in a country with serious energy concerns, and the government is actively pursuing this type of option. So you quite interestingly spoke about the waste that would come off a nuclear power station. Chat to us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, the waste, essentially there's no plan. No one in the world has a plan for how to deal with nuclear waste. There's lots of different sort of ways that they sort of have an idea around it, but nothing is ideal. And it takes a ridiculous amount of time for that waste to cool down. And at the moment, we've got a system where we're just sort of waiting it out. Essentially, everyone that you know will be dead before any of that cools down. So it's a very interesting thing that we really are kind of making something and a problem that we're expecting sort of our ancestors to have to deal with in the future.
Now, one of the very interesting bits of your research this week was that you chatted to a scientist who was basically zapping mussels, little sea creatures, with radiation. Why?
Well, that was the thing, yeah, and it's kind of his life's work. And he's a fascinating man, Jacques Bezuidenhout. And just before I spoke to him, he was going out to collect mussels by himself with his hands. And he had a sort of process of basically using a nuclear reactor, which he zaps mussels with. And the idea is for pollution. So the idea is that the Saldanha Bay, where he's based, has suspected problems with pollution and deposits. So the idea is if you take a mussel, which absorbs everything that the water, so if water is running through a mussel all day, every day, if there's a problem with the water, there's a problem with the mussel. So then if you take a mussel and bombard it with a nuclear reactor, the way I imagined it was that it would just disintegrate, essentially, like in a comic book. But what really happens is that it shoots off gamma rays. So these are all sort of concepts that are in sci-fi movies, but really gamma rays will emit from a mussel after you shoot it with a nuclear reactor, and then you read those gamma rays. And apparently the sort of blueprint that you get in the gamma rays will tell you exactly what was in the mussel. So they can identify 30-odd different elements that are in the mussel, and then they were in the water. So that's how you analyze for pollution in the best possible way. Rather than taking a couple of mils of the water or cutting up the mussel, you use nuclear reactors for it.
Now, of course, when we think about nuclear energy, immediately Chernobyl and Fukushima spring to mind. What would be the implications of a nuclear accident, however rare it could be? What would be the implications for South Africa and Cape Town, where we actually have Koeberg, a nuclear power station?
Well, yeah, I mean, the implications for a nuclear reactor, I mean, Tristan did go into it, and he was trying to, obviously he's very against nuclear power, right? So he's trying to balance the idea of, even though this is a very small possibility, tiny possibility that we'd have a nuclear accident, the risk, he believes at least, is too great. So the idea that South Africa wouldn't be able to cope, even very first world type countries struggle to cope with that. And South Africa just wouldn't be able to cope with the fallout, like literally in terms of a health situation, in terms of what would happen to Cape Town if Koeberg had a nuclear problem. So yeah, we go into that a little bit in the show, and yeah, what we find is really interesting.
Now, having investigated both sides of the argument and really sort of gotten yourself quite deep into a lot of the science behind nuclear reactions, what's your opinion?
My opinion, well, I think there's a lot of good to be done with. We do speak to someone on the show about fluorspar, which is this kind of element that I had no idea what it was, and that's how they build nuclear fuel. South Africa actually has the biggest reserve of this this kind of substance in the world, and we're not mining it properly, and we're not using it properly, and you can build nuclear fuel out of it. So from that perspective, I kind of feel that we should promote nuclear fuel and nuclear energy, because then we could sell the fuel. But I think, by and large, I think that we should be trying to put our efforts into renewable energies. I know that's a very sort of hippie perspective to have, but it feels that that's really where we should be going. But it doesn't stop the idea of nuclear reactors and the whole subject being very intriguing to me. I find it fascinating.
Well, perhaps next winter when we're all being load shed, we'll have this conversation again, Paul, and see if you change your mind.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very tempting when the day before we did the show, I had a power out in my house, and it was very tempting to just want to be like, yes, if this is a problem, I am willing to do anything. If that's the solution, I'll go with it.
Well, that was this week's episode of The Science Inside. You can listen to the full episode below this video, and let us know in the comments section below, are you for or against South Africa building new nuclear power stations? Thanks so much, Paul.
Hey, thanks very much.